I can help.
So, I haven't yet decided exactly what order I would go through those. This was one proposal. And then I thought, well, maybe this would be better. But actually, because after I finish here, Terry Riley is going to be playing in this room. And so I'm going to start by tipping my hat in quite a big way to Terry Riley, who was a very important figure in my musical life. In fact, I could probably say that at least 50% of my ideas come from Riley and the school of people who were operating in the 60s and 70s in what was at that time called minimalism or the new tonalism. I believe that was the other name for it. It's probably hard now for the younger among you to realize what a breakthrough this idea was, that the trajectory of Western classical music or experimental music had been towards more and more atonal and, in a sense, non-musical music. And suddenly there appeared a group of composers who used very, very old-fashioned tonality in a way. In fact, the Riley piece that I'd like to talk about, the piece that made such a big impression on me, was called In C. And there it was. It makes quite a lot of noise, that camera. Sorry, it's all right, don't stop. I just suddenly realized, I kept thinking something was falling apart. So I just wanted to make sure it wasn't me. I think throughout the sort of late Renaissance into the mid-20th century, the idea had been that music was progressing by freeing itself from issues like tonality and harmony and rhythm. And certainly in the 20th century, as the palette expanded, you had chromatic music, and then you had microtonal music, and eventually with people like Cage and the musique concrète composers, you had music that really didn't adhere to any kind of scale at all. And that was sort of seen as an arrow of progress. So it was a very big move when Terry Riley appeared with a piece called In C. It was rather a shock. I'm going to talk a little bit about In C because I want to try to explain why it made such an impression on me. So I made a terrible diagram. I couldn't really come up with anything better, but I'll just tell you a little bit about how the piece is made. So this is the trajectory of time here. And this is bar 1, bar 2, bar 3, bar 4, bar 5, bar 6, bar 7, bar 8, bar 9. And this is player 1, player 2, C, D, E, F. So if it were just that, everybody would be playing in unison the whole time. But Terry had a brilliant idea, which is each player is instructed, stay on any bar for as long as you want. You have to play all the bars and you have to play them in that order, but you can stay on one for as long as you want. So what happens in this piece is it begins like that. Everybody's playing in unison. Quite quickly what happens is that players are playing different bars. So for instance, at this moment you've got 4 different bars being played, 4 there, perhaps 4 there as well. And you know, in the middle of the piece, since it's normally a piece performed with quite a lot of players, you might have 15 or 20 different bars being played together. But because it's all in C major, they all marry up in some way. I was incredibly impressed by this piece, not only in the way it sounded, but in the way it was made. It seemed to me an incredibly economical piece of music. And of course, what's fascinating about it is, A, that it's never the same on any consecutive performance. It's always different. and B, Terry is not in a position to predict what it will be either. So it sort of gives you a different idea of what a composer is, rather different from that classical idea that we gathered from the back of classical record covers, where Beethoven walks around with whole symphonies in his head and sort of sits down and scribbles them out. There's no sense of that here. Another piece that impressed me enormously at that time was a tape piece by Steve Reich that some of you know. It's called It's Gonna Rain. This is my graphic version. In a moment I'm going to show you how this piece works. So It's Gonna Rain is in a very, very simple piece, technically. It uses a tiny loop of tape. It's about 1.5 seconds long or something like that. But the loop is being played on 2 recorders, on 2 tape players. And the players are allowed to run out of sync with each other. So you get an effect like this. It's an oral moire pattern, actually. Can you see what's going on there? Yeah. So again, a very, very simple system. That's perhaps another way of showing it. Yeah, that's a better way of showing it. That's kind of what happens in the piece as it gradually progresses. And you lose all sense of the original phrase, and you start hearing very, very complicated musical patterns. That piece of music absolutely blew my mind for its complete simplicity. And I started to really think about what a composer was. Who was the composer in a piece of music like that? Of course it was Steve Reich. He had the idea to do it. But you know that most of the things that are happening in that piece of music aren't really happening there in the music. They're happening here in your mind. Because what happens with this piece is that just as your eyes are completely confused by this and start to see circles moving and different shapes, the typical shapes of a moire pattern, so your brain starts to hallucinate a whole music that isn't really there in a sense. It's the result of your brain processes being confused and going wrong and grabbing at whatever they can to make sense of what's going on. So one of the things you could say is that in a piece of music like that, part of the act of composition is being handed over to the audience, to the listener. It's saying to the listener, your brain is active, it's not passive. Again, it's different from the classical idea where I'm the violin player and you sit there quietly and listen to me and try to cough only between movements. In this piece, the whole emphasis is that the work of the music is a collaboration between the music and the listener.